really happy to invite Dr. Angel Adams Parham. She is an extraordinary woman that I was really fortunate to meet at the, she actually contacted me, but we met through the classical learning test. She is an associate professor of sociology and a senior fellow at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture at the University of Virginia. She works in the area of historical sociology, engaging in research and writing that examine the past in order to better understand how to live well in the present and to more wisely envision the future. She's the author of American Routes, Racial Palimpsest, and The Transformation of Race, a winner of a number of awards in sociology and social science history. She is also active in public-facing teaching and scholarship, where she provides training for K-12 educators who are looking to better integrate Black writers and Black history into their teaching. She co-authored with Dr. Anika Prather, another really extraordinary lady, The Black Intellectual Tradition, Reading Freedom in Classical Literature, published by the Classical Academic Test as part of this effort. She serves on the editorial board for Cambridge Studies in Historical Sociology, a new series housed at Cambridge University Press. She's a great advocate of the liberal arts, and she's also an associate editor of Principia, Journal of Classical Education. So please give her a very warm welcome.
It is an inestimable honor to be here with you on this very, very happy occasion. So much thanks to President Sheikh Hamza Yusuf for the honor of this invitation to address you on such a beautiful occasion, and I hope that my words will be an encouragement. Beauty. If you remember nothing else from today's commencement speech, and I'm aware of how forgetful many such speeches are, remember beauty, as this will be my first and last word. Among the transcendentals, beauty is often left for last. Truth, goodness, and beauty. It's often given less attention or actively avoided because it's perceived to be frivolous at best or dangerously seductive and deceptive at worst. But beauty has a transformative power to heal and to lead us toward truth and goodness when other means have failed. We must not, therefore, underestimate the life-giving importance of beauty. Let me tell you a story. Here's the portrait that I want you to paint in your mind's eye. There are abandoned lots, weeds growing with abandon. Old tires are tossed here and there, black blights on the neglected lawns. There are children playing in the streets, a bit bedraggled, but full of energy, still filled with hope and delight in the smallest things. As you walk down this street with me, you will see that it's quite a different matter with the adults. Many of them look back or look down with a darkened gaze. Some are desperately hungry, hunting for more of what they shouldn't have, on streets too eager to give them what will destroy them. Others are stronger and healthier, but bowed down and discouraged by hard work over many long years, work that seems to get them nowhere. What is needed in such a desolate landscape? Jobs are needed, yes. Better schools with better funded programs are needed, certainly. Opportunity is what is needed. This cannot be denied. But who, walking down these streets, seeing the portrait I am painting for you, would say that what is also urgently needed is beauty? I hope by the end of my brief time with you here that you will share my conviction that beauty is inseparably connected to flourishing, and that the education you have received here at Zaytuna College uniquely prepares you to share this life-giving source so necessary for the kind of place we are visiting in our minds. But please know that this place that I'm describing is not confined to the space of the mind. It is a real place, the neighborhood where I and my family lived for 12 years in a difficult part of New Orleans, where life struggles are played out in the very public ways on the street, as well as in the homes of the children I was graced to work with. It was there that we built a house. It was there that our church worked to be a life-giving presence. And it was there that I and a group of my intrepid college students worked for several years to bring beauty to young people in the form of classic stories, art, and language. The same kinds of classic stories and literature so prized here at Zaytuna. For what we did was to translate that rich literature into a form that young children would delight in. In the midst of a community hurting in so many ways, we read the Iliad and the Odyssey, we recited poetry and studied art, we ate, drank, and sang together. Much as Zaytuna weaves classic traditions together, bringing the best of Western and Islamic learning and literature into conversation, we wove together Western classics with African, African American, and other diverse materials to create something beautiful for the children. The youth pastor, realizing that our young people had to walk past tempting video games and booming popular music to read Homer with college students, wondered aloud how it was going. He was right to inquire, as we live in an era of aggressive amusements that lure our young people into distracted and sometimes deadly oblivion. The seductive dangers of amusement led Neil Postman to write the book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, a meditation on the damage we do to ourselves as we give into the shining lights that seek to divert our attention from what can really nourish and sustain our souls. But instead of giving in to the shiny lure of amusement, the children came to us after school, where they listened to stories and wrote poetry. And we placed the poetry with art into small booklets that made the children proud, for they had become authors, and they marveled at their own ingenuity. And as the work has spread beyond New Orleans, new children in other difficult places in Houston, inner city Philadelphia, and Uganda have laughed and smiled and discovered and created. I do not relate these stories naively. I do not ignore the powerful forces of social and economic injustice, oppression, and violence that mark the lives of these young people. I have visited homes where children are forced to care for themselves. I have rushed with my own children to stay clear of the windows while bullets are flying outside. So no, I do not speak of the power of beauty lightly or naively. I speak of it because I know the power that beauty, and sometimes beauty alone, has to inspire a life-giving, life-saving vision for the future. It is this same yearning for more that many Black writers of the Black intellectual tradition, so often weighed down by sorrow and suffering, have responded to generation after generation, inspired to creative action by the beautiful vision of a more just world. It was this yearning for the beautiful vision that led Phyllis Wheatley, a young girl kidnapped from the west coast of Africa in the 18th century, to petition the poetic muse to inspire her writing in the cause of liberty during the American Revolution. It was this yearning for the beautiful vision that powered Frederick Douglass's fiery, incisive critique and oratory of the 19th century. It was this yearning for the beautiful vision that led Anna Julia Cooper, born into slavery but destined for freedom, to bring the liberal arts of literature, history, and philosophy to Black working-class men and women in the 20th century, when the rest of American society declared them undeserving and unfit for such an education. I believe that what you have learned here at Zaytuna College has formed in you the capacity to do infinitely more in your own lives than all of these great minds combined, because you have gotten early on a kind of education and formation that most can only dream of having at your age. You have read widely and deeply across traditions, the Epic of Gilgamesh and Aristotle, Sophocles and the Psalms of David, the Analects of Confucius and the Bhagavad Gita, Cicero and Al-Kindi, Ibn Sina, Al-Ghazali, and Aquinas, along with too many more to name. In all of this, your minds and imaginations have been filled with the good things that equip you to counterculturally live the way of beauty, which draws others around you to aspire toward goodness, truth, and justice. As you do this, you will be following in the footsteps of many people, both great and small, who have modeled for us the way of beauty in dark times. Here I lay out for your contemplation 3 lives which embody the transformative power of beauty in a broken world. You'll see that they go from the world-renowned to the everyday. So there's a place along this continuum for each of you to make your unique contribution as well. The first is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn was a Russian writer whose family defied the Soviet government's repression of those who refused to leave the Russian Orthodox Church. Though he turned away from his faith as a young man, the courage he learned from his family stayed with him. And he was condemned to 8 years in prison for writing a private letter in which he spoke out against the government's violent oppression. But what the government meant for his defeat turned into a triumph of the spirit. For it was while he was in prison that he turned to philosophy and back to faith. He then poured his energies into writing, producing literature which shaped the imagination of a new generation, calling them to freedom of mind, body, and spirit. When he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, he devoted his speech to, of all things, beauty. He begins by sharing Dostoevsky's oft-cited quote, "Beauty will save the world." What sort of statement is that? Solzhenitsyn wondered. When, he continued, in bloodthirsty history did beauty ever save anyone from anything? These are entirely reasonable questions, and he pondered them for a while before concluding that the power of beauty lay in its unconquerable truth. Political speeches and social programs may be based on mistakes or manipulations, but a true work of art is never false. Instead, he argues, those works of art which have scooped up the truth and presented it to us as a living force, they take hold of us, compel us, and nobody ever, not even in ages to come, will appear to refute them. And this is why he concludes that even when truth and goodness are crushed, cut down, and forbidden by violence and oppression to push through the soil that seeks to nourish them, the unexpected stems of beauty escape, spread their tendrils, and bring her sister's truth and goodness with her. Solzhenitsyn knew the power of beauty. The next life we'll consider is that of Marva Collins, an African-American woman born in 1936 in Monroeville, Alabama. Anyone who knows something about U.S. history knows that to be born Black in 1930s Alabama meant there was a struggle ahead for you. But Marva had the privilege of being born into an educated, fairly prosperous family since her father owned a funeral business. She was nourished on great literature, beginning with the Bible stories her grandmother read to her. It was her Aunt Ruby who introduced her to Shakespeare when she was 9 years old. She walked into the room when Macbeth was being read aloud, and this is what she heard. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. While she didn't understand what it was all about, the words swirled in her mind, and she got hold of the book to read it for herself, taking delight particularly in these lines, "Double, double toil and trouble," which announced the worrying prophecy Macbeth would live out in the play. Many years later, while living in a different Black community in Chicago, a place of struggle where the children were muted and their eyes were dull, Collins would remember the sparkle great literature had brought to her own eyes, and she embarked on the great work of creating a school that would fill the young people in that Chicago community with beauty and hope. They came to her literally mute. Some had been so profoundly affected by trauma that they did not speak. Others were assumed to have low IQs. But those whom others had cast aside became Marva Collins's intellectual wonders. In the book commemorating her life, she explains, "I was constantly reminding the children that some of the greatest people in history, Socrates, Milton, Galileo, Einstein, Edison, and Columbus, were ridiculed and told they would never amount to anything. Every day I put a different quotation on the board. Speak the speech trippingly on the tongue, Shakespeare. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once, Julius Caesar. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, Thoreau. And, quite provocatively, the proverb, he who eats my bread does my will. This last was meant to remind the children that they did not have to live down to the low expectations others had set for them. Marva Collins steeped her young pupils in literature and philosophy, took them to libraries and museums, and 20 years later, the formerly mute spoke eloquently, and those who had been swept aside like dust were lawyers and accountants. Marva Collins knew the power of beauty in dark places. And finally, we consider an everyday hero, someone much closer to your own stage of life, a first-year student of mine at the University of Virginia. Her name is Saman Akbarzada. Though quite young, Saman has endured what many would find to be unendurable. She lived between bouts of violence in her homeland, going to school never knowing when the next blow might be struck. Then one day, the combatants bombed a school, killing more than 60 young girls very much like herself. In mourning their lives, Saman wrote poetry. You load your guns, we'll turn the pages. You pull the triggers, we'll press our pens. Stain us with blood, we'll paint crimson roses. What comes across in these devastating lines is a fierce determination to learn and flourish, to live life defiantly in the midst of death. As she was writing poetry, she also completed a novel and secured a publishing contract as a teenager. This novel tells the story of a widow who lost her husband to government violence. Then, just as it was due to be released, Saman received word that her life was in danger because of her writing. A phone call in the night at 10 p.m. gave her just 5 hours to pack up and leave the country. As she has sought to make a new home in the U.S., she has continued to write, publishing a book of poetry in 2022. For Saman, the cultivation of the poetic imagination, both for herself and for those who read her work, is as necessary as breathing. As she reflects on the power of writing, she explains, what is poetry but a moment of weakness, and what is art if not finding pleasure despite one's suffering? There is an eerie beauty in pain. Like all other art forms, literature is not only for comfort, but also for coping with the atrocities of dear life, forcing us to crawl under our skin until it feels right and we can breathe again. I aspire for this book of poetry to be a sanctuary. Saman's desire is to become a trauma-informed psychologist and to continue writing in order to put the ineffable and the agonizingly painful somehow into words that help us to make something redemptive out of suffering. Saman knows the power of beauty in the midst of sorrow. What each of these 3 exemplars demonstrates is the power of beauty as it exists in the form of the moral imagination. Iris Murdoch describes the moral imagination as that capacity we humans have to make pictures of the good life while coming to resemble those pictures of the good that we have breathed into being. We struggle, often against great obstacles, to bring this good into being. But where do these images of the good life come from? They come from story. They come from poetry. They come from art. We fill our minds with these treasures and bring them out to empower, to inspire, and to heal. Zaytuna graduates, you have it in you to show the way of beauty in a world that is thirsty for it. For we live in a world where the good, beautiful, and true are more and more firmly crowded out by entertainments and distractions that keep us from the deeper sources that have the power to refresh and inspire. You have been equipped with ways of seeing the world through philosophy, literature, and faith, while so many others perish for lack of them. As you go forth now into the world, illuminate the path that leads to truth, shine a light on obscured byways that lead to goodness, and point the way to the stepping stones that bring us closer to justice. Do this by living a life that is a testament to the transcendent and transformative power of beauty. Thank you.